All right, our number 6 running back in college football heading into the 2024 season is the first of two running backs from Ohio State, and that is TreVeyon Henderson, the guy who's been at Columbus all 3 years of his career, whereas the next guy we're going to talk about is just transferring in to Ohio State right now. But let's talk about TreVeyon Henderson for now, Dalton. TreVeyon Henderson, man, has been kind of a great running back when on the field, but just hasn't really been on the field too much. But when he is on the field, what are some of his biggest strengths in your opinion?
Man, it's kind of weird to just throw a phrase like this out at a guy, but some backs are like this. There's no bullshit when he runs, man. He's a one cut, straight ahead Big Ten runner, and look, he doesn't make a ton of guys miss. You know what's coming. He's a sledgehammer, and I think he's a perfect guy for Ohio State to have when you talk about playing teams like Michigan and Wisconsin and Iowa and these other and the last couple of years he was great against Notre Dame, especially this past year. There, he is just a hard charging one cut runner. He's really decisive. I think that's the more I watched him. So there's a couple of backs on these lists that are not as decisive as TreVeyon Henderson, man. When he sees a hole, he's going to get it. And he gets up on linebackers quick with that. Just if there's an initial burst, there is top end speed to be had, and he's just coming at you. I think he's the perfect back to have when you're running through a Big Ten schedule, cold weather, things like that. I almost get even a like an old, as a Jet fan, I remember the old Sean Green vibe where you know what's coming and you still don't want to tackle him. I just think TreVeyon adds. I think he's going to love Chip Kelly's offense too. By the way, I think just Chip Kelly. He wants pace. He wants north and south downhill. He wants to get 5-6 yards. He wants first downs. I think TreVeyon, maybe even more than Quinshon Judkins, is going to absolutely love this offense. Man, it's simple. It's downhill. It's efficient. He just wants to get after it. There's nothing fancy with Henderson. He's just fast and he's physical.
Yeah, one cut runner, I think, is a great way to describe TreVeyon Henderson, who honestly had his best year a couple years ago as a true freshman at Ohio State in 2021. That year, he had over 1,200 yards, 15 rushing touchdowns as well. Like I said, the injuries have been the issue the last couple years. We'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I think that's the best way to describe him as a one cut runner. Really good out of the backfield, too, in terms of receiving ability. Over the last 3 years, he has over 500 receiving yards, even though, again, he's missed 8 games over the last 2 years due to injury. Still has over 500 yards over the last 3 years. So good receiver out of the backfield. Great in a gap scheme. Over his career, has a 99th percentile grade in gap runs, which I think really goes into what you're talking about before, which is a one-cut runner, very decisive run. He's not going to dance around in the backfield too much. He's just going to find a crease and go, man. He had a 93.8 grade on gap runs in his career. So I'm a big fan of TreVeyon Henderson. He's an above-average athlete, too. Can break away when given the opportunity. So yeah, I'm a big fan of him. 90 grade this past season, which was seventh among Power 5 running backs. 5.9 rushing yards per attempt, which were second among Big Ten running backs. TreVeyon Henderson, unfortunately, just hasn't been on the field enough to maybe be higher on this list. But even if he declared for the 2024 draft, he still probably would have been one of the top running backs in the draft if he was in the draft as well. So TreVeyon Henderson at number 6, Dalton. But what is some of the weaknesses that you see of TreVeyon Henderson?
I think the same things that make him really good can be considered a flaw when you talk about it is a straight ahead running style. It's a one cut running style. You know where he's going to be, right? And he only forced 29 missed tackles last
Yeah.
season. There's just not a ton of shake, right? He's big and he's fast. There's not a ton of shake. It's not fancy. You're not going to see him leading the country in forced missed tackles. The yards after contact can be solid because he gets right north and south. I just think he's I think he's the ultimate reliable back when he's healthy, more so than like this flashy, like make four guys miss and get across the field. And like, no, he is just, and he's a back coaches love, by the way. It's a guy that's going to get me first downs. But you start to question then, is he a 3-down back? You know, he's a decent receiver. I wouldn't call him an elite receiver.
Yeah.
Especially at the next level, he feels like a guy that's more reliable than he would be like, wow, I can have this guy do everything when you think about the McCaffreys and the Camaras and the Gibbs, the Jahmyr Gibbs of the world. Like, I don't see that for TreVeyon. I see TreVeyon as a guy who just really you want to add a physical presence, a physical straight line presence. He does have good vision. It's just that his feet, like you're not going to see those big cutbacks, right? He's going to get what he can get. And I think every team needs a back like that. I think we've seen even in the past, like Najee Harris was like that, even in Alabama, where it was like, he's going to get you what he's going to get you, and he's going to be really aggressive about it. I just think there's not as much versatility in his game as some of the other backs on this list.
Yeah, I think the biggest question obviously is the injury history, right? I mean, he missed 5 games in 2022 due to a foot injury, missed 3 games this past season due to injury as well. That's the biggest question with him is just staying on the field. Now, hopefully, the addition of Quinshon Judkins we'll get to in a later video. Hopefully, that should keep him fresher. But yeah, I think that's the big question with him is just injuries. And I agree that the forced missed tackles aren't great for him. Only forced missed tackle on 21% of his runs in his career, which is, again, below average. It was 19% this past year, which is 38th percentile. So that's an issue for him. So has some drops on tape too in the receiving game, which I think holds him back from being a great receiver as well. One thing I wanted to bring up with him though that is a big positive, he's a really good pass blocker. I believe he was 21st, 23rd in the country, 23rd in the country in pass blocking grade this past year at running back. So really sticks his nose in the pass game, which I think shows how physical of a football player he is, which is valuable, honestly. So I think that's something that to keep in mind with him too, is he is a good pass blocker out of the backfield too. Before we go though, Dalton, how would you handle the Ohio State backfield next year? Like how many, who would be would there be a definitely a lead guy? Would you split touches between the two of them? How would you handle Judkins and Henderson in that backfield next year?
I think it depends what Chip Kelly wants to do just schematically, right? I think Henderson's really good at just getting downhill and just getting me 5-6 yards and really being that hammer. I think it's going to depend on schematics. It's going to depend on the opponent. At times, if you're talking about playing a really rough and tumble defensive opponent, say in Iowa, I might want more of Henderson. If I need more playmaking, if I need somebody who's going to shake guys out of their shoes or work in space, then I need Judkins. I think you're going to see a relatively equal workload, and it could depend on game plan, concept, just maybe even the weather. Man, if they're playing in an environment, say against Michigan, where it's 0 degrees outside around Thanksgiving for any reason, I might want TreVeyon to just be the sledgehammer, right? But they're two players of very, very similar talent. They go about it in a little bit different way, but to have both of them on the same team, honestly, it's not fair. It almost feels unfair to have them both and to have that luxury. It's really not an issue, and we're going to get into it later. I think they're both going to benefit from having each other and not having to bear 30 and 35 carries in big games or what have you. Like, the fact that they're able to split the work, I think benefits both of them.
I mean, 2 of the top 6 running backs in the country, honestly, is pretty ridiculous. So Ohio State has that luxury next year of having TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. I will say I had Donovan Edwards around my top 6 or top 7 last year, along with Blake Corum, and Edwards is kind of the forgotten guy in that offense next year. I don't think it'll happen with Ohio State, though. I think both those guys will see a pretty close to even workload. I think the one thing I would say, and we'll talk about it with Judkins in his video, Henderson I would use more out of the backfield as a receiver. I think he's a much better receiving threat than Judkins is right now, whereas Judkins is probably his biggest negative is his receiving ability. I would use Henderson, especially as a third down back, man, receiving ability. And like I just said before, he's a great pass protector too. I think as a third down back, Henderson will probably use most in that Ohio State offense next year. But I cannot wait to see those two along with Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator in that offense with Will Howard, maybe running the ball a little bit too. Should be maybe the best rushing attack in college football, I think, by a mile with how good those two are. But that's what we got for our number 6 running back, TreVeyon Henderson out of Ohio State.